Welcome to Beyond the Breakwater, where just beyond the crashing waves of fear, discomfort, and doubt lies the greatest potential for life transformation. We want to guide you into the open waters where the calculated risk you take becomes the turning point for you or your organization to thrive. So draw up your anchors and prepare for departure in this week's episode of Beyond the Breakwater. All right, we are back with another episode of Beyond the Breakwater. I am Lyndsay, and with me today is Ed, and we are joined by a very special guest. This is a former pastor, now is the founder of a nonprofit called Woodworkers with Heart, and his name is Gerry Fay. So welcome, Gerry.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Yeah. So we would like to just open up the conversation today. We've started having guests on. If you've been listening along, we've had Jim Pearl from St. John's. We had Kelly from Evansville, Indiana. And now today we're having Gerry. And I think it is really valuable both for us as well as our listeners to just see, like, we're not just like blowing air here, just having talking about all of the ways that a church can impact the community, or ways that nonprofits can impact the community, and ways that individuals can actually activate their faith and do what we were meant to do and serve. But this is beyond us. We've got people across the country doing this. I think Kelly's comment the last episode is she was like, okay, I'm not crazy. I'm not the only one that's doing this. And Gerry, we met you pretty early on when we started the podcast. I think it was like...
You refer to me as the number one fan?
Yes, you are. We paid him to say that. No, I think it was like by episode 4, and we were blown away because I was like, how do we have like this random guy that has been tuning it? Like, how did he hear about it and all that? And you've just been really encouraging to us along the way, and engaging and commenting and emailing and having phone calls. So that's been a big blessing. But Gerry, just to turn the floor over to you, could you share what your ministry is that you are doing? And then we'll kind of jump into the history too.
Sure. Right now, we run a nonprofit. It's a standalone nonprofit, not connected to any church or anything. We make beds for children in our community. We've been doing that since 2018. And from that, we also make toys, which I have a little toy here.
Oh, cool.
They're just simple wooden toys. We started making the beds, and we would build the beds in community projects. Different groups would come in, they would fund the build. They'd come actually just take a pile of lumber, build the bed frames from start to finish. Then we'd take those bed frames, put them into storage. That group would come back on another day, and we'd actually deliver those beds to people's homes. We would provide mattresses, sheets, blankets, pillows, a complete bed to those families in need. We had a tremendous amount of need in our community. We had no idea when we first started this in 2018. We try to encompass an area around us that's called Akron, Canton. And it ended up being to the point where we were overwhelmed by requests. People requested a bed, and they got put on a waiting list, unfortunately. And one of my pet peeves that we eliminated down the road. But we eventually, before COVID hit, we had over 400 bed requests that were sitting on our books waiting to be filled. And we only, on average, filled maybe 200 to 300 beds a year, and barely put a dent into that ministry. I've always been drawn towards helping the community. Probably the biggest question your listeners probably want to hear: how did this pastor go from being a pastor to running a nonprofit? It was always in my heart to it was always in my heart to help the community. When I was in college, I was in Bible college. I interned with a church that had a food bank ministry, and it was just so appealing. Nothing special about the food bank. They would just we would pack up groceries. People would come in. We would put those groceries in their trucks, the trunks, and in their cars, and talk to them. And I was just fascinated by it, drawn towards it. And so one of my first churches, actually probably the second church I was senior pastor in, we started a food bank ministry. And I had the typical pushback that most churches might get starting an outside ministry that you kind of experienced from other pastors you've talked to. The typical kind of fears of, well, we can't afford to do that, or how are we going to, we don't have enough people to volunteer to do that. And I was this young and just uneducated and unexperienced in the problems and the all the things that people were concerned about, and I just went ahead and did it. And we pulled the community together. We got freezers and storage shelves, and we just started giving out food. We gave out 150 sets of groceries out each month, and I got a great education on what it was like to help that segment of our community. And I learned a lot. I didn't grow up in that atmosphere. I grew up in a middle class home. Both parents were union workers, so I was spoiled. And so I didn't grow up in that. And so I got an education as we seen those people, and you begin to get things that why people were warning me against it. I literally had pastors who say, let's leave that to the government to help feed the people in our community. And I kind of, in hindsight, I began to understand their concerns and why they would say something like that. But I knew it was still the right thing to do. And I was kind of on the pathway, as most young pastors start out. You go in a direction, and you go from one church, and then you try to grow that church, and then you may go to another church and try to grow that church. And of course, the grass is always greener on the other side. So you go to the next church, and I was on that pathway, and I just kind of got interrupted in all that after starting that food bank and knowing that there need to be more, and I needed to learn more how to serve our community better at this means. So I completely jumped ship from our denomination and joined the Salvation Army. I didn't literally join it. They had a program that was back in the 90s, where they wanted to take different pastors on from different denominations to try to make themselves more diverse. And so they rolled the dice on me, and I became the pastor of the second largest church, Salvation Army, which most people don't realize the Salvation Army is the church. The second largest church in Ohio, and led that church for a very short amount of time. There I got more education on how to serve or how not to serve. Got to the place where I learned, and one of the reasons I went with the Salvation Army, I haven't checked the numbers lately, but back then they had the largest amount of giving every year that went to a nonprofit outside the Catholic Church. The Salvation Army received so much funding, and even from our government, utilities, different organization. And I wanted to see how they were doing that. And so I took that leap of faith. I joined them, became a part of the organization, and watched the organization and realized that the church and the organization was two separate entities. And that was kind of heart-wrenching. I remember one Thanksgiving, we packed groceries to give out, and I invited the church to come and help people come in and just maybe carry a box out to the car or something. And I couldn't get any volunteers to show. It just wasn't in their culture to actually help.
Why do you think that wasn't translating?
It just was a tradition. Salvation was started in England during the Depression. The pastor he was a street evangelist, and he's seen that the people were hungry. So before he could preach to them, he fed them. And after they got their food, they were able to receive the gospel, and they preached the gospel to them. That's the Salvation Army's tradition. They no longer follow that tradition. It's just a means of what they do. And I don't know how it went astray. I just knew that we clashed. I was still young at that time, and unfortunately didn't keep my mouth closed. And said things that were that pushed me out of the organization quickly. And I went from there to other churches, but always had a need of just helping the community. And there was a time that I found myself in between churches, just attending, and this opportunity came available. And so we started to do this. I always have loved woodworking. It was just has always been a passion. I spent most of my high school career in the wood shop. I would have probably gone into the field of woodworking. While I was a pastor, I was also worked bivocational. I was a union pipe fitter, and so that was what my dad did. And I just kind of fell into his footsteps, and then fell out of his footsteps by going into the ministry. But all the churches that I pastored, I worked bivocationally, so I was working in the trade and also in the ministry. But my heart was always to help people. And
I'd
when I found
imagine.
myself in between churches, I just said, well, let's do this.
Mm.
Let's just start this organization, start the nonprofit. And it has been the best thing. I'm still licensed as a pastor. I try not to say this into too many groups, but I enjoy building toys and beds more than I do pastoring.
I'd
I
imagine
know.
too, when you're doing bivocational ministry, like having your foot in the world where other people like outside your office are. Like it's like you hear the pain points, you hear people's lives, their struggles, their story, you hear the needs that are out there. So when you say this opportunity became available and you jumped on it, being like the woodworking that you're doing and building beds, what did that look like? Like, how did you identify this was a need? How did you identify it as an opportunity?
Well, it came. When we first started, we were with a national organization called Sleep in Heavenly Peace. They are a national organization. They build beds, and it was actually Mike Rowe from Dirty Jobs that did he had a show that was just aired on Facebook. It's called Returning the Favor, and he went and did a show about them starting out in Idaho and how they got started. And during that show, they had a place where you could become part of their organization, and I became a chapter president. And that was just a tremendous. They just had everything. It was just like plug and go. We became part of their organization. We came back, went there to Idaho for 1 day training, came back here, raised funds for tools and material, and recruited all my friends and family to help. And we started building beds and started recruiting other organizations to do that. It was right during COVID is where we kind of kept our nonprofit locally and wanted to keep our funds locally. The toys were kind of getting in the way. It was a kind of strange thing. The toys ended up being something that we made from the scraps from the beds. Most woodworkers will not throw a piece of wood away. You're going to use it for something, and that's exactly what we did. During COVID, we couldn't make any beds because we made them in group projects, community projects, and so. But I still had a whole bunch of volunteers, and they messaged me and said, "Hey, what are we doing? Can we do something?" And at that point, we had a pretty large shop that we had rented out and for building beds, and so I just invited most of them retirees to come to the shop on Thursday and Friday to build toys. And we shortly ran out of scrap, and we found other companies, industries in the area that we had one company that was making roofing trusses, and we got scraps from them, and we started making more toys. And my wife works at the local children's hospital, and we would take those toys, finish them, paint them, put wheels on them, and donate them to the hospital. The hospital uses the toys, and it's just I could never do what my wife does, working with sick kids. That just breaks my heart, and I couldn't even hear half the stories that she told coming home. But the stories that really grabbed my heart were how the hospital uses toys. They'll keep the toys kind of scattered all throughout the hospital behind the nurse's station. And as a child goes through a difficult procedure, just is nervous or in pain, they'll give them a toy to kind of distract them
Mm.
and comfort them. So they'll use it that way, or they'll use it as they're leaving. They get a free toy when they leave the hospital. And so last year we gave 1,200 toys to the hospital. This year will probably be over 2,000.
Wow. That's incredible.
So, Gerry, you made the choice to move from Sleep in Heavenly Peace to your own nonprofit. What was the reason behind that?
There was a couple different things. One of the problem was we were building beds and toys in the same shop. At that point, we had started a nonprofit just for the toys, and Sleep in Heavenly Peace had a conflict with. They were concerned that somebody might see that they weren't, the funds weren't secure. Were they going for the toys? Were they going for the beds?
Mm.
Which I kind of understood. We tried to separate the shops, but the finances wasn't there to run two shops. Then there were some other organizational problems with funding that was going back to Idaho that wasn't staying locally. And we just felt that we wanted 100% of what was donated in our area to stay in our area. And so we made the decision to go ahead and just bite the bullet and take that on ourselves.
Can we talk a little bit about when you said you served in various churches? Was there a frustration with the church of not wanting to really serve the community?
There has always been that little bit of tension in there. Pastors, back when I started the food bank and I was young and naive, and I told the area churches and pastors that I knew very well, hey, we're starting a food bank, and if you have anybody in your church, send them over. And they were very reluctant to do that. There was a kind of I don't know if you want to call it gatekeeping that was just going on even back then. I contacted other denominations, other churches in the area, and the common response was they told me about what they were doing in the community. Even though I was just trying to share with them a resource that they could use if they had anybody coming into their church that was in need of food. And it was a common occurrence that we don't want to say that we're in competition with each other, but in some respects, churches tend to hold that up. And it's a difficult thing to talk about. Pastors may not want to admit it, but we're a little bit insecure in our position. We want to keep people happy. And sometimes we fall to the pressures of the board, pressures of the congregation to do what they want to do instead of what we know we ought to do. So,
do you think the churches didn't want to be in the community or serve the community? What was that? Or were they more take care of us instead of we should be doing things in the community?
It tends to be a tighter knit circle. The church always seems to want a return on its investment. If they put effort into an outreach, they want to see a return on that. And they want an automatic return. I can even remember when we started the food bank and we were into it about a year, and the board member had approached me and said, we're not seeing anybody coming in from Sunday morning from the food bank. And that kind of comment is pretty common in circles of pastors. It's hard to digest as a younger pastor. You kind of understand what they mean, your outreach and the typical outreach of maybe the traditional outreach of a church has been just that. We do an outreach to grow the church or to add people to Sunday morning. And that can't be what it is about. And I knew that back then. I just didn't know how to explain it. I didn't know how to tell them that that wasn't true giving without the thought of any return at all. And I love your illustration about talking about if it was one of their kids and we reached just one person. And you really have to look at that when you do community service. You really have to, you can't allow it to become a give and take place where you're doing something like that. You're doing it freely. You're giving freely. And in that, you get to meet people and you get to share the love of Christ with them. That's the back and forth. But often, and I don't know if it's just tradition or how that mindset has taken place. It's still there. I thought by starting this nonprofit and building beds and toys that I thought, well, I could go to pastors that I knew and save them a lot of time and just give them a ready-made outreach. Just you could plug your people in, they can come build beds, they can come and deliver beds. And I had many churches, and churches still do take me, do work with us on it. But there's always there's that tension there. I've had churches where we ask every group to fund the build, we call it, where they pay for the material, the bed, they pay for the whole cost of the bed, and they also bring volunteers to build the beds. And that's known up front. That's just how we do our fundraising. I've had churches pull out their funding after the build and not pay for the mattresses and the sheets and blankets and just pay for the lumber. And the reason I get is because funds are short. And then of course, me being a pastor, I dig a little deeper and I said, well, did you ask the people to give? Did you, present it as a need? And usually the answer is no. They take a lot of, when I approach a pastor to do a build, they'll look at their general fund, they'll look at what's available instead of just making it an open need to their congregation. And they miss out a lot on that. They miss out on the opportunity, and they tend to safeguard what they have. Unfortunately, it's just a false premise. They're not safeguarding it. For some reason, we have this misconception that all the giving takes place in the church. The reality is that people have many different pockets they want to give to, and the church is just one of them. And most pastors don't like to hear that, but it's true. People give to different areas. They'll give, it's just their heartbeat. If you told me and I was sitting in your church, you said, hey, we want to build beds. I'm like, I'm giving towards that. If you're, tell me you're going to do some other outreach, that might not be my heartbeat. And so I might not give towards that. And until you open that up into your congregation, you have no idea where those people are at. You have no idea where their heart's at. Much of what we have as far as tools and equipment have been donated by people in our community. I have just randomly asked people, I said, hey, I see you got this item for sale. Would you consider selling at a discount or donating it to our nonprofit? And that was just kind of the way we did. When we needed something, we just asked the community and they responded. One of the needs that we had early on was a forklift. We had to move piles of lumber as they came in off the truck, move them into the shop, and then take piles of the beds and other lumber in and out of the shop and move it around the shop to make it a functioning process. And so I started looking around for a forklift, and they're not cheap, very expensive. And I found one for sale on Facebook Market. It wasn't new. It was used, looked like it had been beat up and sit in a corner for a long time. I emailed the person and I said, hey, here's what we do. Would you consider selling at a discount or donating your forklift to us? He came and he visited us and he donated that forklift to us. And not only did he donate the forklift to us, he put a new battery in it and delivered it to our shop. And when he got into the building and, he's, of course, he had seen already what we were doing, then I got his story. And his story was that he had 3 boys. And one of them required going to the children's hospital twice a week when they were younger. And he's like, I get what you're doing. I completely understand it. And I want to help. And that's a pocket that no church would have ever reached without asking. And so the pastor's fear of saying, hey, there's not enough money for it is just a false premise.
Mm-hmm.
And going beyond the breakwater is going beyond your thoughts of how money comes into the church.
Do you feel like there's a lot more freedom having a separate 501c3, a separate organization? It's easier to go beyond the breakwater, and you can get a lot more buy-in from a lot of different people and groups?
Absolutely. There's a wall, there's a bias against the church in our community, unfortunately. It's not anything that's going to change soon. As a standalone nonprofit, I can ask anybody, any place to donate. They just want to know what you're doing and how you're going to spend the money or how you're going to use the item that you're giving them, and they donate. I would like to say equally across the board, people in our community are as generous or maybe even more generous than church people. I don't like to divide people like that, but it's just the way it is. There's organizations that just give towards children's ministries, and we have no idea they're there unless we go outside the church. There are organizations that are just there to help the community.
Mm-hmm.
I received a grant from a business organization. The group is called 100 Who Care, and they have different chapters across the United States. And they meet twice a year, and they have in their meetings, they invite, and this is all their meetings, they're just, business people, they're just socializing with each other, just, sharing information and kind of finding a community for themselves. Well, in those meetings twice a year, they invite 3 nonprofits to come and share what they do. And at the end of that meeting, this group picks one of the nonprofits to donate to. And each person gives $100. So there's 100 people giving $100 to that organization. And that's all they do. And it's amazing, I've raised more money being outside of the church than I could have ever raised being closely connected to the church.
So what would you say to churches? I mean, I really understand fully what you're doing. I mean, I think it's amazing what you're doing. What would be the message to churches who are like, how can they do something similar? Or is it even possible?
A long time ago, we told our people that they're gifted and they have gifts to use. God's given them, at least one gift. There's a secondary and a primary gift. All you have to do is release those people to use those gifts and encourage them. There are just key things that the church, and that's my fascination with your church and your organization, that somehow you have put together this business of doing a nonprofit, but still keeping the church connected. And I think it's a good thing. We need the accountability. We need to be able to be answerable to people, even though nonprofits have a board. And it's a great way to do that. But to have the church just allow their people to say, what are you passionate about? What need in our community do you care deeply about? And let that person start it. Mm-hmm. It doesn't take a PhD. You don't have to have a master's in business. You just have to have the people encouragement. You can figure it out. We have the internet these days. You can figure out how to start a nonprofit. Mm-hmm. They just need the encouragement. They need the encouragement and the example of other churches. Hey, they did it. We can do it. And it is a difficult process to separate the churches, to be able to say, this is not necessarily for us. This is for our community. And I think it's growing. I think there's more reception to that. They see the difficulty in keeping everything inside the church, and they see the handicap of it. It's not necessarily a plus to keep everything inside the church. It's better to do outside the church and reach more people. It's just amazing.
Something you said that was kind of like an aha moment for me, and it's just a comment. I don't have a question attached to it, but you had mentioned like to freely give. And I think what I hear in your ability to serve the community through a nonprofit that is not affiliated with the church is you've freed up your heart to be able to serve without the expectation of a return. And I think that is kind of what that is talking about, like give freely. And I don't think that is like talking about an exchange of a physical thing, but like, is your heart freed from that expectation of return? And if like Jesus's expectation when he served someone was, okay, I would expect to see you on a Sunday morning because that's my metric for serving, I wonder how many people he would not have healed, you know? And so it's like, I love the heart of your ministry and the heart that you're now able to, like, we're just doing this because it's something we ought to do and we love to do it. It's what Jesus would have done. And it's out of an overflow of a love for Christ to just serve.
Yeah. Giving freely doesn't mean always giving it away, though.
Mm-hmm.
I really, I learned a lot through that and a lot through you guys about how to give in a way that keeps people's dignity. And I've watched people lose their dignity by giving things away freely.
Explain
one
more
of the
of
first,
that. Because that's, I mean, I think there's a real key there.
Yeah.
How do you do that? Or how did you transition? Like, maybe take us back. Were all the beds free for a season? Are they still free? What are you doing with toys? So explain how you work that now.
Well, let me go back to where they were free.
Yeah.
We just gave them away. Organizations came in and we gave it away free. That's a hard mentality to get out of. One of the first deliveries made in 2018 was just before Christmas, and we were delivering a bunk bed to a family. It was typical. There wasn't much unusual about it. We came in, we set up the beds. The only thing that was unusual that the dad was there. Most of the homes that we brought, there wasn't a dad. There was usually a mom there. And this one had a dad. And that delivery changed my mindset completely. I watched the dad as I'm carrying things in, and he's kind of helping, and he's in the room and in the area, and he's not happy, which is a little bit unusual because usually when we showed up, everybody's happy. Mom's happy, the kids are happy. But I could tell that he physically was not encouraged to see us. And I didn't know why. I didn't know why then, and I know why now. I never talked to him. I never went back to him and said, "Hey, what's up?" But I knew from a dad's standpoint. I have 4 kids, all grown, and it made me look back on other experiences too and say, what was going on with that dad? And I know the enthusiasm of moms. They want to provide for their kids, and they'll call everybody in town, if there's a resource available to provide for their kids. That's just a mom's instinct. Dad's instinct is to provide for their children. So I don't know what was going on that this family couldn't afford to buy a bed and a mattress for their kid. But I think it had something to do with dad's position where he wasn't able to, and how we just went in there and robbed him of his dignity, that he wasn't providing for his family. He had to go to another organization and reach out and ask for help. And I know as a man, that is like the hardest thing to do. We are so stubborn. We won't even go to the doctors because we don't want to ask for help. So I get it. And it was a real struggle, and we're still struggling. I think I sent Lyndsay email just a few weeks ago. How do you do this? Questions and answer. How are you guys doing this and pricing and stuff? And so we have gone a new route. We still give beds away free to those families that need it. We definitely try to find out if there's a dad in the picture and talk to him directly. Try to communicate to him in some way that he could either help us or pay back or pay part of that bed. We allow them to say, this is what the bed cost. This is just what we're paying for material, mattress, sheets, and blankets. This item is free, that it was donated to us, so we won't even add that in there. And we'll just give them that invoice, so to speak, and say, if you could pay any part of that, that'd be great. We'll put it towards the next bed, the next family that needs a bed. That's a hard transition. Yeah,
Very hard.
even my board gave me a lot of pushback. They're like, we just want to give it away, and my board is made up of church people, and they just want to give it away. It's easy. It requires less contact, less effort, less on our part. Unfortunately, it's harder to put a price on things and help people keep their dignity, because you become more involved in their life. You become more involved in what's going on. The reality is they need much more than just a bed. They need family. They need community. They need people around them. And so it's hard, but it can transition. The one thing that has really helped us, we found out that our local county, through Child Services, is now giving beds away using federal money, which has really helped. Now they can fill that gap for those that are on welfare, and we can reach the moms and the single parents that are struggling to keep food on the table and work 2 jobs, and be able to provide for them and give to them. And a lot, we got rid of the list. We no longer use a website to fill out an application. We give all our beds out through word of mouth, through the community. We let churches know, we let groups know, hey, we have beds available. If you know somebody in your community, if you know a family member that knows a family member that knows a family member, let them know we have a bed. One of the last beds that we just gave out ended up being a patient that my wife had. The mom had a daughter, and they were transitioning from one housing situation to another. Difficult problems with the marital problems, so that she had to find a new house and new beds and everything. And I said, sure, we got beds. We're glad to help the family out. And we had that connection. My wife knew them. And so there was that connection there. They came to the shop. I said, our shop here's located. Come pick it up. We didn't deliver it. I wanted the people to show up and be in a place where I could meet them and not just be on their doorstep right away. I met them. I said, here's the beds. Glad you can help them pick out different sheets. The mom came also, and I didn't know who she was. There was a bunch of men there. I knew the one lady, and they started loading the bed into the truck, and then they started telling me who people was. This is my brother-in-law. This is a family member. This is my cousin, came to help me. And then I met Mom, and that was amazing, just to be able to hear her story about what she was going through, and to allow her to share that, and to be able to help her in just a small way. She had a lot more needs and a lot more things going on, but just to be part of that, what it's all about.
Right.
Have
you ever thought about asking families, like, how much can you put towards this?
Yeah, that's kind of what we do.
Okay.
We say, here's our cost.
Yeah.
And if you could put something towards it, great. If you can't, that's okay too. We also do, if you want to kind of put the work effort into it, we'll let you know when our next bed build is. You can show up and help us build some more beds. This way they can kind of invest. If they don't have the finance, they can invest their time into helping us build. And I said, hey, we're always there on Thursday and Fridays, building toys with retirees. And so they're more than welcome to come with that, sort of give them that dignity back that they may be losing, having to ask for a handout.
It's a hard transition when you transition from free to charging something, but I think we've learned kind of both, and like through the garage would be a good example, that sometimes we wouldn't say this is how much the repair costs. We would just say this is what your cost is. And they had no appreciation for it because they didn't know what the real cost was. And I think we've learned along the way, like this is what the cost is for a bed. How much can you contribute towards it right now? Like, what do you have right now that you could contribute towards it? And that's when people that we found are so honest. They're like, well, I got a couple of dollars. We had somebody actually come to the healthcare clinic just this last week, and we said it was $40, and they said, I don't have $40. And we said, do you have anything to contribute towards it? And they said, well, just a minute. They ran out to their car and they scraped together some coins and came in and put all the coins on the counter and said, this is what we have. And we said, paid in full. Done. We're so glad you're here. So it's a hard transition, but I think you're right. I think it really makes a difference when people feel like they can contribute something towards what they're getting. And then I think they appreciate it a whole lot more because they bought it. Yeah. So great job on that. But boy, that's a hard transition for boards, isn't it?
Yes, it's very difficult. And with your help, well, right now we're looking for more warehouse space so we can buy lumber at bulk and make that savings even greater. Cool. So we're working with a local lumber yard to see if we can get that done. Right now they've offered to sell us a semi-load. We just need a place to put it. So
that's awesome.
That is awesome because we're talking about like Pivot Point, our appliance ministry, going into roofing and ramps. And that's something that we were going to go to the manufacturer and say, could we buy them by the semi-load? And could you mark it down for us because we're not profiting from it? So, but we talked about this yesterday and with Matt Markey that we're going to need some warehouse space.
Yeah.
So that's great. Love what you're doing. I think it's amazing.
Thank you.
Gary, we're coming up on the end of the episode here. How can we and listeners be praying for you as they listen to this episode? What can they do?
Well, right now we're looking for more space. So that's a whole nother venture of getting into business real estate. So definitely pray for that and open door. I know from the past to try to find the owner. And I'm looking for that one person that was able to help us and that has that space available and that maybe could discount it to us or even donate it to us. But just the people that we come in contact with to be able to reach our community. Those people are, I don't know how they got there, and that really doesn't matter, but we definitely have a need in our community, especially with beds. Somehow it's a new thing the government's actually helping now, but in the past it was they gave them housing, they gave them food, they gave them health care, but they didn't really provide for beds even in the welfare housing. So the need is still there. Ask any teacher, they'll tell you which student doesn't sleep well at night, and they probably don't have a bed to sleep in.
Wow,
that's incredible. Okay, so speak into the heart and life of church leaders for a moment who are listening. What would you suggest to them?
Wow, that's a hard one.
It is a hard one.
It is. It's a very difficult transition to be able to do, but I would say trust in the Lord for your position and for you making waves getting out of the harbor. Here's the thing you have to remember. I can remember not preaching on a Sunday morning and feeling like when I got home that I needed to do something. And often after you get done preaching, you felt like you fulfilled God's calling in your life. In reality, you haven't. You've just done a part of it. So if you couldn't preach tomorrow or you couldn't preach on Sunday, what would you do? And you would do exactly what I'm doing. You would reach the community in some way. You would take your giftings, you would take your passions, and you would use them. And I would say, encourage your congregation to do the same. Those people don't get up to preach on Sunday morning. They're listening to you, and you're firing them up, but not taking them anywhere. By not allowing them to do that, to use their giftings, to go out in the community, what they need is the resources that you have. They need the building. They need the encouragement. They need to say, yes, you can do this. We'll be part. We'll stand behind you and encourage what you're doing and guide you and find you the resources you need. That's what your congregation needs. That's the fuel that'll get the boat out of the harbor.
Wow.
Just feel that
Great
way.
advice.
Firing up and not taking them anywhere. That was amazing.
We could quote that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gerry, for your time and for your ministry and where you're at. And I loved this conversation, and I feel super encouraged, and I just have learned a lot from you. So thank you for being here today.
Thanks, Gerry.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah. We will see everybody next week. Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Beyond the Breakwater, a podcast of Elevate Community Ministries. Don't let the conversation stop here. You can email us at hello@beyondthebreakwater.org. We would love to chat with you, answer questions, plan a visit, and help you take your next step. We'll see you next week.